So welcome, welcome. Happy month of February. Today is the 10th day of February, and it is week 5 of spring term 2021 at Stevens College. So a very special warm welcome in these frigid temperatures to all undergraduate students at Stevens, to all online students, to all graduate students. Welcome to all full-time faculty and part-time faculty. Welcome to all part-time staff and full-time staff. Welcome to our beloved Stevens alums. And welcome to any Columbia community members who may be connected to Stevens and are taking advantage of this opportunity. We are thrilled that you have created and prioritized time with us today. You may be eating your lunch, you may be between meetings or club organization meetings, and we thank you. And thank you for embracing this opportunity of free professional development. So we are awesome. We're excited. This is the first of 6 facilitation opportunities that are offered from Stevens on the organizational level. And so today we have Jill McClintock, and Jill has worked with Services for Independent Living, known as SIL, for 14 years. And Jill loves supporting individuals with disabilities, seniors, and veterans live independent in their homes and in their communities. So as the Education and Training Coordinator and Facilitator of PAVE, which stands for People Advocating for the Voice of Equality, she is passionate about learning as well as SIL's vision of creating a barrier-free community for all people. And we are blessed to not just have one facilitator, but 2. So we welcome Renee Powell, who was already dropping nuggets and wisdom and takeaways before we even started this webinar. So it is my pleasure, Stevens community, to bring to you our facilitators. And thank you, Lita Pistono, for being the glue who coordinates a lot of this for us, and our technology guru. Thank you. But it's my pleasure to introduce to you all who will facilitate us and increase our awareness about folks who navigate the world with disabilities, cognitive, linguistic, behavioral, and physical, Jill McClintock and Renee Powell.
Great introduction. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having us. And so I wanna open up this conversation by throwing out a question to you all and saying, what comes to mind when you think of the word disability? And there's no right or wrong answers. Can you all hear me?
I'm checking the chat, Jill and Renee, so you all
can
just continue.
All right. So, okay, so everybody's going to be communicating through the chat.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I was waiting for voices. Okay, that's great. So,
you have one. It says, I think of the word itself being broken into 2 parts, dis and ability, and what that means.
Oh, very good. We'll come back to that. So thank you for that. Okay, so we are going to start with, there's 3 topics we're going to cover, and it's probably enough for a 3-hour conversation, but we'll try to fit it into one. So we're going to start first with language and giving you 2 perspectives on language. And so the first one that I want to cover, which is the one that we use at our center at SIL, is person first language. Well, and before I get to that, let me first, probably when you think of disability, you also think of the word handicap. And before I joined this group, I was thinking, you know, handicap and disability were kind of hand in hand. But what I came to discover is handicap is actually the barrier that exists for people with disabilities. So when you say a person who uses a wheelchair is handicapped by the lack of a ramp or handicapped by stairs. So differentiating between the term disability, which is the condition that someone has a handicap, which is the barrier itself. And did you want to add any more to that, Renee?
Well, I could add that the origin of that word comes from, like, it is where it's used in, like, sports, where people who golf have a handicap, which is a diminution to even the score or to even the starting point. And I believe that's a reasonable explanation, but it's but it's an intentional diminution. And for those of us who have disabilities, there's nothing intentional about it. It's just part of our experience.
So let's dive into the person first language, and we encourage questions as we go along. You don't have to say those at the end, so please submit your questions as you go along, and then we'll have questions at the end as well. So when we talk about person first language, we're looking at language that emphasizes the person first and not the disability. So one would say, instead of saying I have an autistic child, the language would be I have a child with autism, that the person comes first. And so when we talk about person first language, and we're putting it in the context of disability, the person comes first. But I always say, if the disability is not germane to the conversation, if it's not important, don't even mention it at all. So in writing or talking about a person with a disability, disability is not always something that even needs to be mentioned in conversation. And when we talk about groups of people with disabilities, or individuals with certain types of disabilities, instead of saying I work with the disabled or I assist a quadriplegic, you would say I work with individuals with disabilities and I assist a gentleman or a woman with quadriplegia. So we're not labeling the person based on their disability alone. And so I say label, I had in my handout, label jars, not people. But I think the most important thing when I think about language is I tell people I'm not here to be the word police and call people out when they do or do not say certain things. I don't want people to be afraid to speak about disability or have conversations about disabilities. So I don't want people to come from a place of fear of saying something wrong. What this discussion is about just building the awareness that words do matter, and the context and the meaning behind words do matter. So let's talk about that for a minute. We want to avoid words that have a connotation of pity or tragedy. So avoiding words such as crippled, afflicted, victim. And of course, I think we all know to avoid the R word, retarded. Anything that has a negative connotation of disability as a tragedy, as something that we should pity. So my question to you as a group is, so I think we can all agree on those negative terms. So on the flip side, if you were to say that Renee and I are courageous, inspirational, heroic, is that more positive? Is that what are your feelings on using those words? And how do you think we would respond to those terms said about us?
Jill, as those responses come in, I want to give you some feedback. A member of
Yes.
our faculty, Chase Thompson, he said, quote, label jars, not people, end quote. I love that. Thank you. Smiley
Oh,
face.
great. Thank you very much. Okay. So comments can still come in, and comments can still come in. And Renee can chime in on, because I know Renee has a personal experience with this as well. So I will not yell at you, get very angry with you if you tell me I am inspirational. I get that feedback a lot. And I actually won, when I was in graduate school at MU, I won the Gumption Award for being the student in the department with the most gumption. And I didn't know how to feel about that. I was flattered that, they thought me worthy of that award, but I really did feel that the reason that I got it was solely because I had a disability and I was seen as persevering through my disability. And so what I tell people is, when you put us on that pedestal of seeing us as heroic, inspirational, it does bring around a level of making me feel kind of uncomfortable, because I don't want to be seen as anybody different from anybody else. I'm just living my life the best that I can. And yes, are there some things that are difficult about disability? Yes, there is. And I think the feelings of inspirational and heroic come from the perspective of not having a disability and thinking, I don't know how I would live life and get through life if I had a disability. And the bottom line is, you just do it. You just do it, and you don't think about it every single day, how you're doing it. You just get through life like everybody else. And so that's kind of my perspective on that. And Renee, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I like the way I have heard it said. If the only difference is doing something sitting down instead of standing, that's not necessarily inspirational. That's just using your body the way you can. And that's just, it's just how we go about things. And it's really, we have to almost aspire to be ordinary and be considered ordinary. and it's funny how that is kind of a struggle to just be taken as we are, and doing things as we do them in the best
And you've
way.
gotten some feedback too, Jill and
Great.
Renee.
Great.
So folks have said, holds us all to sometimes impossible standards. Talking about kind of the hero language. Those
Yes.
terms may also be problematic, was a comment. An attendee said, what happens when terms used become pejorative over time? For example, there are so many terms used for what used to be called mental, the R word, that it's confusing. Eventually, all these terms will be considered slams.
Yeah.
And then the last piece was, being called heroic is not positive because it implies that a person with a disability is overcoming great suffering or enduring something that is difficult. It makes it seem like living with a disability is not normal or just simply living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, those are great comments. And what I will say, and I was going to say this in the wrap up, you'll get a lot of words and terms. Say this, don't say that. The best thing that you can do is ask the person what they prefer. And I will tell you, within our own PAVE group, there was disagreement amongst our PAVE group about what some terms. Some people preferred to be called persons with disabilities, and some people were fine with the word handicapped. I mean, it really is. It really is based on the person and their experience. And I will say that some of these negative terms, and Renee can touch on this as well, some of these terms that we see as negative from an outsider perspective are actually taken on as personal labels for the person with a disability. It's kind of almost like, I don't know, would you say a badge of honor, Renee? Or they're kind of taking back the term and making it positive for themselves, even though it's seen in a negative context.
With the shortened CRIP, for example, which was the shortened from cripple to crip. And you may have heard of the movie Crip Camp. And that is rooted in history, because there was a group called the Rye Crips who was a performance art group, and they did their best to reclaim that word, and they used a shortened version, and that's important that it doesn't have, they shortened it to avoid sort of a Tiny Tim association.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, as a person viewing this, viewing our discussion, and you were given the person first language chart and, you know, the guidelines, I would say just, you just take them into your mind and or your heart, but it's all going to depend on the context with which you use the word and the person that you're talking to. It's just really kind of just consideration, because there is debate with everything, and there is debate with language, and not everybody's going to come down the same way. But that's what the beauty of dialogue and conversation and perspectives. So and before I move on to Renee, a couple more things. The term able-bodied, as opposed to saying a person doesn't have a disability. So why do we not use able-bodied? Because we really, as people with disabilities, want to focus on the abilities of the person. And so somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name, disability, and breaking that down. So I saw this wonderful photo, and I think it was Renee that actually brought it to my attention, that says, "Don't diss my ability." And the diss was written kind of erased in the word. So yes, the term is disability, but we really do come from a strengths as opposed to a deficits perspective when we talk about disability. And as a person that uses a wheelchair, the last thing I will say before I move on to Renee with the identity first language is, I am not confined to a wheelchair. I am not wheelchair bound. I do not spend 24/7 in my wheelchair. And in fact, I see my wheelchair as a source of independence and freedom for me. So when somebody says, "Are you, how many in your group, when we go to speak somewhere, are confined to wheelchairs?" I rephrase that to say, well, 3 people in our group use wheelchairs. So that's why we don't use those terms. Or so that's person first language in a nutshell, very briefly, because we have other things to move on to. But I want to make sure that the identity first language perspective gets some attention as well. And I will ask Renee to cover that.
Okay. Identity first language is something I tend to use and tend to prefer. I refer to myself as a disabled person, and it's an accurate description of disability as it comes from the outside. I am disabled in the sense that there are environmental pressures that are disabling. My body there are things that are difficult. One of my legs doesn't work as well as it used to. but that's not so much a problem in flat environments and when there are elevators. And so I avoid places with stairs because stairs are themselves disabling. And so that's why I like to use that term.
And I think the argument is, you know, we refer to people, we call people, we say someone's an athletic person, an artistic person, a creative person, and we have no problem putting those words before the word person. So it's only because disability has a negative context that we feel like we have to separate saying the person before the disability. So I think that's the argument for the identity first language, is disability is nothing to be ashamed of. It is part of who we are. And so we shouldn't refrain from putting that ahead of the word person.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's not a negative thing. It's just a neutral fact. That
it's only negative by society, which we will talk about.
Right. But in my experience,
right,
it's not a negative. And in fact, I wouldn't know the people I know or have had the experiences that I have had if not for disability. And those things are important to me. Mm-hmm. And they have made my life better in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So before we move on to etiquette, are there any questions or additional thoughts on person first language? And I know there will be a delay with the chat, so maybe I should just keep talking, and then if there's questions, Shashank can interrupt us. So now I'm going to move on to etiquette, and there was no way that I can get through all the etiquette points that I put in the handout, so I do refer you to your handout, particularly on the disability specific pieces. But I tried to put some general points for etiquette, and I think people are so afraid of doing something wrong, and the whole word etiquette kind of has the connotation of, oh, we have to do everything right, and what if we screw up? That's not how we want to come at this. So that's why I put the first point, relax and be yourself. So if you meet Renee and I on the streets, and one of the members of our group said this, like, how do you start a conversation with us? We'll start by saying hello, and we'll go from there, and we'll go from there. And I think Renee and I are both open about our disabilities. So if you did have a question for us, we would be happy to answer that. So it's just a matter of just relaxing and being yourself, and get to know and appreciate the person as they are as a whole. So I am much more than my disability. Disability is certainly who I am, but that's not what I want to focus on and talk about with people all the time. It's about, what are my interests? Yeah, I'm a sister, I'm a daughter, and I do all these other things and have the same hopes and dreams as everybody else. So I'm really no different than anybody else without a disability. And if you met one person with a particular disability, you've met one person with a particular disability. We're not all the same just because we have the same disability. Focus on what the person can and can't do. Focus on strengths as opposed to deficits, and work from the assumption of that somebody is capable, instead of seeing someone with a disability and thinking all the ways that they're not. And I say, well, before I get to that, ask someone with a disability before you come in and help them with a particular task, even if it looks like they're struggling. So for example, I use a reacher to pick up something that I drop on the floor. Now, if I don't have my reacher with me, or I drop my reacher, then I'm up a creek. But sometimes, depending, I can pick things up. In the former chair I used to be in, I could pick things up from the floor. Now my mobility is not so great. So you may come into a room and see me bent over, contortionist, and looking like I'm struggling, and I'm bending over and I'm trying to pick something up. Most people would think, well, I need to help that person. I'm gonna jump in and grab it off the floor for them and give it to them. Which, again, I will not get angry with you if you do that. But I value my independence, and I value being able to do things independently. So if I've spent 5 minutes trying to get something off the floor and I'm really, really close, I want to go ahead and try to do it. So the best thing that you can do is say, can I help you with that? And then if I tell you no, don't feel sad. Don't feel sad if you're rejected, because I do, like I said, I do value my independence. And the last thing
if I can add something to that, one of the things that is kind of cool and intriguing about living with a disability is you have to find these creative ways to do things sometimes, and it's like a victory. And it's like you sometimes when you do these things, you revel in your own genius because you've figured out how to do something that was really hard, and it's fun. and it's like don't deprive me of my joy and fun.
Yes, I have had those moments of joy where I'm like, I did it, and it's totally unconventional. It's not what you're going to find for physical therapy students, occupational therapy students, nursing students. You're not going to find the way I do a lot of things in your textbook as the conventional way to do it. But if it works for me, it's success. And I can be very creative because I have to be. And so I do get very proud of myself when I do those things. And so yes, I say the best question that you can ask anyone, whether they have a disability or not, is how can I support you? And then wait for the answer. So one of my former coworkers said that all the time to people, no matter what somebody was experiencing, how can I support you, disability or not? And so my next question for you is, I put in this list, be mindful of accessibility and accommodations. And I think when we talk about accessibility and accommodations, we think of it from strictly a disability perspective, but I want to give you a thought that one of my former coworkers totally blew my mind. She is blind, and she said, lights are accommodations for people who can see. If we were in a room together and the power went out, I would be able to get out with no problem, and it would be the individuals that could see that would be scrambling around for their flashlights, stumbling in the dark. And that gave me a whole new perspective on the way that we view accommodations and things accessible in our world. And so my next question to pose is, what are some things in your life that maybe you see as an accommodation or something that makes the world more accessible for you, disability or not? And I guess the example I would give is, if you're short like me and you can't reach something off a tall shelf, how do you accommodate for that? And Renee, do you have any thoughts on that particular issue?
I once read this great book where John Hockenberry, who is a wheelchair user, was speculating about what fish might think when they see people using oxygen tanks, because we're incapable of breathing underwater. And it just flipped the whole thing, and it's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, like, we're such a technology-based society now that I saw something on Facebook that back in the dark ages, not really, but back in the dark ages, people would turn their televisions on. They would actually have to go, heaven forbid, have to go up to the TV and actually turn it on. There was no remote control. There's no Alexa. There's no smart devices. So I think when we think of it in the context of, we use things to help us through life every single day. And yes, people with disabilities need maybe more specialized equipment or something, but the whole concept of universal design, that you design something to meet everybody's needs regardless of the condition, is very exciting for me.
Yeah, well, and actually there's a universal benefit to that, because everyone who lives long enough will have some kind of disability. So
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
that's good for all of us.
The
in the end.
disability community does not
There's a
discriminate.
there's a term called temporarily able-bodied, which is that we, most of us are born temporarily able-bodied, and some reach the point of having a disability at different rates. And for me, my first disability acquisition was when I was 14.
And I was born with mine. So I think your perspective on disability is going to be a little different. Like, disability may be all you've ever known, and disability may be something you came into later on in life. So you have the perspective of life without a disability, life with a disability, and it does alter your thinking. Do we have a question or comment?
So Jill and Renee, there's been a couple folks who either emailed or said accommodations were things like step stools, ladders, glasses, eye contacts.
There you go.
So,
Beautiful. Yep.
so a couple people were naming smart devices, like you said, Alexa,
Yeah.
or some people said when you can clap your hands and your lights come on.
Yes.
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 Right? So, yep. So that was shared, and then I'm going to mute and double check the Q&A.
Okay. So I want to pause here and give you guys some time to give us your experiences, whether it be, do you have a question about language? Do you have a question about language specifically that you want to ask us? And then also, have you come into a situation where you didn't know, an etiquette question, like you didn't know how to handle a situation, or you had a scenario that you want to ask us about specifically? Oh, and the other thing that I will say that I think is very, very funny, and we'll probably talk about this more in the next presentation when we talk about attitudinal barriers, but there's this view of disability, there's this concept of spread effect, that just because I use a wheelchair, and granted, there are people with multiple disabilities, so that's not what I'm referring to here, but the whole idea of spread effect, where just because I have a disability that requires me to use a wheelchair, that does not mean it necessarily impacts me cognitively, and my hearing is not impacted as well. So there is no need to shout at me or talk slower to me because you see that I am in a wheelchair and because you see somebody has a disability. Now, again, that's not to say that people don't need certain ways of communicating to make things easier for them. But I think there's and I've talked about this with my friends that are blind, is there's this tendency to want to shout at someone because they can't see. It's just like a natural kind of inclination to do that. So no need to talk louder, no need to talk slower, no need to talk in baby talk. Pat me on the head. And now I know a lot of people call people honey and sweetie all the time regardless, so that's fine, but no need to treat me as a child. I am an adult. But again, I don't really get upset over those things, because I know people come from a good place. Unless you're flat out rude and disrespectful and coming from a hateful, mean place, I'm all about grace, and you know, I know most people come from a good place.
So you do have a question, Jill and Renee, and the question
Great.
goes back to something you said pretty early in the facilitation, is there was a question that really says, in what ways or how can I compliment you? So they're saying, you know, when you talked about getting that award, and that on one hand you were flattered, but on the other hand, you kind of felt like you had gotten the award because of navigating with your disability. So I think people want to know, like, how can they actually genuinely compliment you? Like, if they really get from you that you are a go-getter or a fighter, or you speak up or you speak out, or um, a second person said it this way. They said, you know, for folks of color, we often might get the compliment of, oh, you're so articulate. And
Yes.
most of us kind of know that they really, a lot of people mean that as a compliment, but they may not also understand that that can be taken as a microaggression, because are you saying I
Yes.
was speaking well because your bar is pretty low for people of color? So when that's happened to me, I've said things like, well, you literally need to say how you constructed that argument was really good. Or I like the rhythm of your speech, right? So I try to tell people, be as specific as possible when you're
Mhm.
complimenting me, because if you just tell me I'm articulate,
Mhm.
my brain is all over the place.
Mhm.
So hopefully that helps. I think they want to know, with folks navigating the world with disabilities, how do we actually give compliments?
Mhm. Did you want to take that one first, Renee?
I've been called articulate as well. And it was in a context, I was at a conference for people with developmental disabilities. So I know it was directed in this way, in with low expectations was the ex, and I would have rather heard, I like what you had to say, or I appreciated what you had to say. Um, so just to reinforce the point um, that you were making. Um,
I think if it's somebody that I because I'm all about let's have a conversation. Let's you know, I love my conversations. So if it's somebody that I know, really well, I will. If they were to say, if I won the Gumption Award and they were to pay me a compliment for that, I would probably want to dive into what is the context within which you're giving the compliment. Are you giving the compliment because I have the disability, or are you giving it as a general, like, quality or aspect of me that you just like in general? So if you say to me, oh, you're a really great advocate, for me that extends beyond, you know, just the disability. That's who I am as a person. Or so I think just kind of, I would encourage people to think about what is influencing their praise. Is it within the disability context? Would you be saying that regardless of whether I had a disability, or is it because I have a disability that you're saying those things? And again, I'm not going to say it's bad or good. Just getting people to think about how they're viewing the praise. Does that? I hope that helps.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Are there any questions or other examples that have come through that people want to share?
Not at this time.
Okay, so the last thing I will say on the etiquette is, if you are meeting with somebody with a disability and they have somebody else with them, either supporting them or maybe not even supporting them, maybe they're just out with their friends, or it's someone who is deaf that is with their interpreter. A lot of times what happens is the comfort level is all direct, is particularly if somebody has an issue with speaking, or the person is difficult to understand, or the disability manifests itself in such a way that the person's really uncomfortable because the person's not expressing themselves in a way that makes conversation easy. We still encourage you to direct your conversation to the person, and if they can't communicate, they'll either defer to the other person or the other person will step in, but you don't want to ignore the person and act like they're not there and just direct conversation to the other person. And I can give you an example on that. And this has been a while ago, but my dad took me to an orthopedic appointment, and he came up with me to the front desk to register so he could give me assistance if I need it. And the lady at the front desk said to my dad, "What is her name?" And I said, "My name is Jill, and I'm here for my 10 o'clock appointment," or whatever it was. And so my dad and I had a conversation after that where he's like, "If I come with you, I'm going to step into the background, or I'm just going to wait and let you take the lead, because when I'm with you, the conversation gets directed toward me." Okay. And so if there's any other questions about etiquette or language as we wrap up, because I do want to save time for questions, we'll come back around to that. And I think we're doing pretty good on time. I was so worried. When I put it together, I'm like, we're not going to have enough time, but I'm glad. So
You're flowing beautifully.
Thank you so much. This is a wonderful experience for us, and again, thank you. So the last thing that I want to talk on, and I know there are more models of disability, and that's why I invited Renee to come. The models that I'm most familiar with are a medical and social model, but I know Renee has more perspectives on models as well, so she may touch on additional models. But let's look at the medical model of disability first, which says the problem is the person with the disability. They need help. They need to be cured. They're sick. They can't do this. They can't do that. The problem lies within the disability itself and within the person. And so I have a personal experience with this, and this is the beauty. This is the beauty of the journey, because it is a journey of being a person with a disability, and the beauty of doing a group such as PAVE, where I can surround myself with people like Renee that give me a different perspective on disability. Because you would think, and I will be quite honest on this, you would think that as a person born with their disability, I would be super well adjusted, comfortable in my own skin, comfortable with my disability. It is not the case. I'm still working on being comfortable with myself and comfortable with my disability. I'm not ashamed to have a disability, but it has been a process. And I will say, in the first probably good 6 months to a year that I was doing these presentations, and I've been doing them for the whole 14 years I've been in SIL, when I was talking about, all these things, all these positive things, they really were not getting ingrained into my brain, because I was not really believing all that I was saying. And so my point on the medical model is, I had the opportunity to potentially get this medical procedure that I thought was going to fix me. I was not going to be broken anymore. I was going to be fixed, and I was going to be able to be, going back to language, quote unquote, normal. And I did the trial for that procedure, and the doctor came in and said to me, "You're not a good candidate for this." So I had two choices to make. Either I could be absolutely destroyed and it be all about my disability and what was wrong with my disability, how I hated my disability, all the negative stuff, or I could accept myself for who I am and come to the realization that I am not the problem. It's society that gives us messages about what having a disability means. It's the barriers, particularly the attitudinal barriers that I faced in my life, that made me feel that having a disability was something negative and something that needed to be fixed. I don't need to be fixed. Now, granted, I am not saying that physical therapy, occupational therapy, medical interventions is not something that I pursue for a quality of life issue. It absolutely is. But I'm not doing it because coming from a perspective of I need to be fixed because there's something wrong with me. And so that's what the medical model means to me. And then the opposite of that is the social model says, disability is not the problem. You're not the problem. It's the society and all the barriers that come from what society puts in your way. And the biggest barrier that people with disabilities face is the attitudinal barriers. If we can address that, then we come a long way. And that's why these presentations, these dialogues are so important. So I'm going to stop talking now and turn the floor over to Renee to dive more deeply into these models. And
I have epilepsy. So the medical model is I definitely pursue medical interventions because frequent seizures are dangerous to me. They can cause injury and create a lot of problems. So I don't fully reject all medical treatment, but at the same time, when I started having trouble with my legs, with my leg movement, I did not want to treat that medically because I didn't want to interfere with the epilepsy treatment. I decided to just adapt and use a mobility device and just move along that way. And it made it easier for me to just accept it and move on and just adapt to a different way of moving around in the world. So that's one way of looking at it in my life anyway.
And so going along with the social model, and we talk about the barriers that society has. One of the common questions that I get, and I'll pose this to Renee, one of the common questions that I get is, how can I be an ally? I'm a person without a disability, but how can I be an ally to you in the disability community? So what would be your response to that?
Well, support policies that make it easier for us to navigate around in the world. Public transportation, for example, is one thing. I can't drive because I have epilepsy, so I rely on public transportation. And it also helps me tremendously to have accessible buildings and entrances and things like that. So that is one way that is.
And the biggest thing that I can do is just build your awareness. I think there's a debate amongst, and I had this in some of my educational sessions. Should people with disabilities only surround themselves with other people with disabilities because they're within their comfort zone? They're within, people who understand them the most. And we say, no, broaden your circle to have not only friends and acquaintances with disabilities, but also without disabilities. So I would say the same for those individuals without disabilities. Expand your network to include people with disabilities, have those conversations, examine your own attitudes, ask questions, attend webinars like this, which is great. And just Yeah, just, and even, I would say even people with disabilities don't know everything there is to know about disability, and their perspectives can shift as well. So it's not kind of an us versus them approach. We're learning right along with you. And so, so that's what I would say to that. And so with about 9 minutes left, I had that time carved out for additional questions, things that we didn't get to, comments, and a cheap plug, if I might. If you want to learn more about disability and/or stigma as it relates not only to disability and but also other groups, race, religion, gender identity, all kind. We are having what's called a human library event, where human books connect with human readers. Did I say that right? Yeah, human books connect with human readers to share conversation. And so if you check out Columbia Public Library, it will be on, our first one will be on February 21st, 1 to 3. It's on a Sunday. You can register to be a human reader and come spend time with some of our human books and just in conversation and ask these questions that are on your mind. And there's no right or wrong way of looking at things. It's just about perspective and broadening your horizons. And Renee's going to be a book in the March event, so I'm really excited about that. But just another opportunity to come and learn and grow. So my cheap plug, thank you for that. So yeah, questions or comments?
That was a fantastic plug, Jill, and thank you for the link. We will send
Yes.
that in the follow-up email to everyone with the link for them to sign up as readers in the Human
Wonderful.
Library Initiative. So that was a perfect time. You took one thing off my wrap-up list, so thank you.
Oh, excellent. So thank you. I wanted to make sure, and I'm like, don't forget to mention the human library. And even when it's written down, I'm like, don't forget to mention it, because I sometimes get so excited toward the end and for the sake of time forget. So
No, you're perfect. And I actually want to take an opportunity to make sure our community remembers that Jill and possibly Renee, if Renee's schedule is allowing, will be back with us on March 3rd and April 14th. So this was one of a 3-part series. There'll be different topics in each of those, but save the date. There was an email. So if you haven't, it's another opportunity to save the date, March 3rd, save the date, April 14th, so that you can continue your journey of learning. So you answered one of the major questions that came through, which was about allyship, right? If I navigate the world without disabilities, how can I show up for people and communities? There was a comment, this has been very informative. Thank you to the presenters. And that's from Jenny Trom, who's part of our
thank you.
engagement and institutional advancement team. She's amazing. Also, Betsy Murphy has shared, thanks for putting in a plug for universal design. As more people adopt it, the price of implementing it is wait, hold on. Thanks for putting in a plug for universal design. As more people adopt it, the price of implementing it is good all around. So I think that's an actual one. So we are part of higher education. We have staff, faculty, students. So in what ways do you see universal design showing up in our Stevens campus?
Well, I pointed out your pedestrian bridge. I really like that. It's I've used that a lot because that's a busy intersection to cross, and just crossing through Columbia. I walk a lot of places I go, and I like your pedestrian bridge. That's a good.
I really never thought of universal design as it pertains to education. I've thought of it more as like housing, and from a housing perspective. And really the only accommodation I ever asked for, and again, everybody's going to be different. The only accommodation I ever asked for when I was in college was a desk that I could pull my wheelchair underneath. I didn't ask for a note taker. I didn't ask for extra time on tests or anything like that, because the desks in the classroom were not accessible to me. So that was really the only thing I ever needed. And then of course, if an elevator didn't work, or if I came to a door that was didn't have an automatic push button, those were that posed a challenge to get access to the classroom. And then I think for field trips and different out of class excursions, there were things to be mindful of when planning those. And it's just about, people were always very nice and trying to help, but we can do. I'm really excited about the concept of universal design, because like I said, it's going to help all people, and then you don't have the issue of what helps me but not you, and it kind of helps everybody across the board. So
Well, when those automatic doors and curb cuts showed up, shoppers really fell in love with them, and people with strollers, and they were the kinds of things that everybody really loved, that adaptation, and
yep.
then they became standard.
Fantastic. No, those are very helpful because we have
Mhm.
residential students, so we have dorms and residence halls. Of course, we've got classrooms, we've got hybrid modality modes. So you just gave us a couple tips for us to
And-
work out.
And the accessibility issue doesn't come down to just physical accessibility. You also look at accessibility when it comes to communication and the format with which you send out presentation materials, your class notes, things like that. So it goes beyond just ramps and automatic buttons.
Yes, and the individual who wrote the disability, Sadie Mayer Strand, we want to give her a shout out. She's our director of the Student Success Center and our ADA Section 504 coordinator, and she's the one who put that in the Q&A, but she also did a phenomenal presentation for our faculty at the beginning of this term that was just on those points, Jill and Renee, about how to make Zoom specifically accessible for folks with invisible disabilities. So she walked faculty through being able to, whether it's hit the transcription button, right? Or all the different pieces to it. So perfect.
And so I think a survey will be sent out so you can give us feedback on this presentation. And I also, in the handouts, I included my contact information. So if there are questions, things that come up, after you have some time to digest it, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I would love to hear more from the people that came today, or if you come to the next one, you can save your question for the next go around.
Well, we want to take this opportunity, though you can't see it, I hope you too will feel it, that the Stevens community is clapping, snapping, using whatever the ancestors have given them to show our appreciation and our affection for sharing pieces of your lived experience, for sharing your knowledge, pieces of your journey. I have quotes all over my sheet, so I'll be sure to share those with you, the nuggets that just I captured. But you're absolutely right, we will follow up. And we will send out the post-facilitation survey so we can obtain some feedback. Again, we'll send the link for the Human Library Initiative that is part of the SIL, Daniel Boone Library, and the Inclusive Impact Institute.
Yes.
Our next facilitation in this series will be February 24th, and that's going to be a presentation on ungendering allyship presented by the Center Project. So we will send out Zoom information for that shortly as well. And I want to thank the equity offices. That is who is producing this 6 facilitation series. So thank you so much to our equity offices that are comprised of Title IX. Thank you, Shannon Walls, our special assistant to the president and our Title IX coordinator. Thank you to Sadie Mayer Strand, who serves as our director of Student Success Center, and also our ADA 504 coordinator. And then I'm Shashawn Dial, and I serve as the inaugural director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Office of DEI. And so it is our pleasure. You can always email us individually, or you can email us at equity@stevens.edu. You can also go to any of our pages on stevens.edu. And most of them are pretty simple: /DEI, /Title IX, /ADA. And there's information on each of our unique offices, and then lots of the collaboration and the initiatives that we do together. So Jill and Renee, if each of you will give us a final word, that's how we will close it out. And thanks again, Lita, for being you and being our technology coordinator and guru.
Thank you so much, Shoshana, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you everyone for coming and listening to us talk, and just when you go out into the world today, just pay attention to the conversations around you, the things you read in the newspaper, magazines, stuff you see on television on how disability is represented, and just kind of give it some consideration, some thought on what you see, and how maybe things could be presented in a more friendly, more positive light, because I think we're getting better with disability, but there is some ways to go. Renee?
Also look for the positive influences of disability in the world. Like I say, the curb cuts and the automatic doors and all of these things we're all grateful for.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have
Renee.
have a fantastic day. Thank you.
Thanks, you do the same.
And thanks,
Stay
Stevens
warm.
community. Yes.
Happy
stay
Valentine's
warm.
Day too. It's all
Absolutely.
about love. It's all about love and acceptance. So happy Valentine's Day.
All of that. And you all embodied that today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Peace.
Bye-bye.